Hi everyone, my name is Łukasz, and today I will talk about flexible networking in Swift. I am working at Droids on Roids, and we are from Warsaw. So, as you can notice, I am following the trend about highlighting the puns in the words. On iOS.conf there was a UI view controller with troll in it, so yeah, there's work with networking, whatever. So we'll start with networking timeline, which I drew for this special occasion. So first of all, there was a time before Swift, yeah, dark times, and there was this event called WWDC 2014, which brought to us Swift and then we have to work with both Objective-C and Swift. So how was it before Swift? So in case of networking, it wasn't probably this. I think that I started with NSURL connection, which was the first library that I've used. And it was pretty good in that time. And I was probably all the time doing this abstraction layer stuff, which had a lot of boilerplate code that you don't really need to write every time. And I was pretty happy when I discovered F networking, which helped me a lot with the code I didn't need to write. It covered everything I needed in that time. But later on, there was this thing called NSURL session, which was the upgrade from NSURL connection. Of course, F networking also adapted and was using NSURL connection under the hood, but there was a few security issues with it, and I didn't really know if I should go with F networking or still go with NSURL session, so I was kind of split. But then there was this event, WWDC 2014, and boom, Wild Cliff Ratner appeared, used Swift, and was super effective, at least on me. So I instantly fell in love with Swift and with Cliff Ratner as well. So how was it with Swift? Well, there was a few cool features in Swift itself, but also on Xcode, which is the really nice plugin of Swift migration tool that I really like. And about networking in Swift, I also started with NSURL session this time. I wanted to feel the pure feel of Swift, but not so pure because there's still Objective-C and PI, but ported to Swift. So after that, I discovered the beautiful Alamofire library. And this was cool, but still lacking something. It was ported to Swift, but I didn't really feel like it was Swifty enough. So I found out that there is this cool framework called Moya, which is the real title of this presentation, because Moya is the one that will flex a bit more. And you can, if you don't know about Moya, you can find it on GitHub. It's open source, github.com/moya/moya. So yeah, let's start with Moya. What is this Moya thing I'm talking about? So if you imagine yourself doing this network layer over and over again, you might see on your left side that you still have an access to Alamofire or any other NSURL session and so on. So even though you're creating the layer, abstraction layer over the Alamofire, you are still having an access to network to Alamofire, which is not so cool. Even though you have that abstraction layer, you are still allowing users to go underneath. So what Moya does is encapsulating an Alamofire, and you are only accessible to use Moya itself. So Moya is allowing you to use only the things that you need, and you don't have an access to Alamofire itself. So this is just the first feature, big feature from Moya. And the next one is easy testing. So if you want to test your code, Moya is treating tests like a first-class citizen. So you will see later on that in the basic setup you have to provide some data for testing. So not only testing, but flexibility itself. So Moya is flexing in a matter of many closures that you can pass. So you can do many things in many ways, and it still works great. And I will show you later on. Another cool extension to Moya is reactive extension, which is optional. Actually, you don't really have to use any reactive programming at all, because Moya in itself is cool enough to bring you the features you need. But if you want to use Moya with full potential, I really suggest that you will use either reactive code or Eric Swift. And the last but not least is a community, because Moya was started by Ash and Orta back in the day, but it's now developing by many users in open source community. So if you want to help, if you want any feature, you can ask on GitHub, and there are many people that can help you out. And this brings us success. So let's start with a basic setup. We got the idea of Moya. So basic setup is we have to create a target, which for now is enum. Enum is the designed way of doing things in Moya, but there's also a way of doing this with structs, which is not documented now, but you can still try it if you dig into the source code. And we are creating one endpoint with user profile. We provide a string with username, and it should resolve us the data from GitHub. So we have to conform to the target type protocol. This protocol has 5 properties which we have to cover. First one is a base URL. Oh, it is pretty simple. Next we have path, and here you can see how we can use different paths for different endpoints, and we have here just one case, but imagine you have 20 cases and more. Actually, it is kind of large if you want to write it only in one endpoint. I mean, in one provider target type. So you can split your API on few target types, or you can use structs API, which is not documented again, but you can still dig in the source code for it. And there we have method, standard methods from Alamo Fire: get, post, delete, etc. And we have parameters. We don't need to pass anything at all right now, so we just pass nil. And we have the sample data, which I was talking about. This is for not only for testing, but for this is just a stopped response from the network. If you want to use stubs, it will get the data from here, not from the network. So more about it in the next slide as well. So this is the basic setup, but how do we really perform a request here? So we have to retain the provider. This is really important thing. If you don't retain the provider here, which is the property of view controller, you will get strange errors like 99999 or something. So take care of that. And after we retain the provider, we just run the request with the clean enum case, which I was showing before. And that's it, just it. The pure configuration was done before. We just have to know which endpoint you have to call. This is pretty easy. And in result, you can see that I am mapping the JSON already, parsing the JSON already. So I am printing myself what JSON did I get. But there's many mappers that you can choose from Moya. First is the object mapper. We have Swifty JSON mapper, Argo, model mapper, Gloss, JSON. And if you don't have on the list your favorite one, you can just check the code of the existing ones and just copy and just inspire yourself and write one. So let's flex something. Let's start with problems. First problem is how to pass an authentication token for every request we perform. So our API needs authentication token in every request. So how shall we approach this? Well, I managed to do a Moya utils struct, which is containing endpoint closure. This is just to abstract some logic here. Endpoint closure is the important one. We have also the URL function, which is just to help us with getting the URL, which is kinda dirty. So let's start with endpoint. Here we have creating an endpoint. So endpoint closure needs to create an endpoint from a target. And how shall we approach this? So first we need to create an endpoint, which is pretty easy. Getting the URL is done by the URL function below. And the second parameter we have to pass is the sample response closure, which is just a closure with network code 200. And we just pass the sample data we were configuring before. There are also two more parameters, which are method and parameters. The first, they are both not required to pass. The default implementation is get for method and nil for parameters. So you don't really have to pass it, but if you want to make a request with different methods and different parameters, you should really pass them. Then we have checking for authentication token. So I have a struct that gets me authentication token, which is optional. So if I have one, I just add another HTTP headers to current endpoint. It is done by this magic function with many letters, like in Objective-C. And that's it. And you have in every request, you have authentication token passed. Pretty cool. So we have that endpoint closure, but we have to pass it to our provider we've retained before. So we just do it by passing the endpoint closure in the initializer of my provider. And that's it. That was pretty easy. But let's start with another problem. So we have another authentication token to pass, but sometimes we want to pass it in headers. Sometimes we want to pass it in parameters. Sometimes we don't want to send it at all. And sometimes we want to pass a guest token instead of authentication token. So how shall we approach this? Well, my interpretation was to create two enums. First is authentication token presence, which has three cases: nowhere, in headers, or in parameters. As you can see, this is just to tell our endpoint closure if we should pass the auth token, if it should be passed in headers or in parameters. So there's also this second enum, which is the authentication token required really? Nope, it is, but it should be a guest token, or it should be an auth token. You could also do an associated type with in the second enum, but it is going real too deep for me, and I prefer to split it on the two enums. So we have two enums that tell us about authentication token. Let's create a new target. So target type contained 5 properties, and we add another 2 to the existing target type, and we create another protocol. So this is just two properties we have from the enums, and we want to add a default implementation of it. So by default, our target type don't want to see any authentication token at all. We don't need any guest token or auth token or anything. So we just stay with no by default. So we have created this new protocol But what to do with it? We didn't really change anything. So we have to improve our endpoint closure. How do we prove it? Just a one conditional statement. So if we want the authentication token, we can just go through it. But if we don't, let's just return that endpoint to Moya. And if we want this authentication token, let's get where should it be. So should it be in headers? Then we just add the endpoint HTTP header to the endpoint as we done before. But if we want in the parameters, we just pass it in the parameters by calling endpoint by adding parameters. And that's it. One switch and we're done. By default, this is nowhere, so we shouldn't really do anything. And that's it. It was still pretty easy. Let's go to the real problem I wanted to show you today, which is API without API. What does it mean? So imagine yourself on the plane, and you don't have internet, or your API is crashing once in a while. So you don't want to rely on your API, but because you can record the requests and you can use them without an API. So you're working with internet without internet. Wow. So what is my solution? Using stubs with simple data and recording stubs. So you could have to record them manually and add them to the project and do a script that gets it from the folder or whatever it is. So I wrote a little script that every time you perform a request, this request is recorded, it is placed in your project, and it is used in your protocol. So you can, with one switch, you can use stubs instead of networking, and that's pretty cool. And unfortunately, recording works only for simulators, so take care of it. We will start with a bash script. This is just a hack to pass the current path to the stubs. It will be everything on the GitHub project, so you don't have to remember the script. But the customization here is to pass the path to the stubs, and that's it. It is adding to info please record where to put the stubs. The interesting part is the plugin that is recording the requests. So Moya has a plugin type that you can conform to, and we have to implement two methods. First is will send request, and second one is did receive response. So every time we receive response, which is success, which is basically if the response was serialized in Alamofire. So every time we receive a success, we want to map this text to a string, then get the name for a stub, which is done by the function before, and save to the file. It is pretty simple. My debugging here and error throwing is just a print and error, because this catch here is not only when there is a bug in a path in a bash script, but also when you are recording with phone. So it is not designed to record with phone. Actually, you could save the stubs in your phone and import from your project when you run in a simulator. But this is to improve the script. And getting the stub file name is creating from the enum a name with specific status code, so you can not only save your stubs for a positive success response, but you can also save your error responses, which is cool for debugging. Oh, so what happens if I throw it up or I get an error? What do? We have stubs only for a success. So it is pretty cool. It saves not only successful responses, but also errors. there is the third step, which is another target type. So basically, I had to expand the auth target type we were talking about earlier with stub status code, which is to provide what status code we need to use in our endpoint closure. So it is an error, or is it a successful response? And we also make sure that in the default implementation, it is on a successful response, so we don't have to change it in every target type. But also, there's a simple data. Simple data which is provided by default, just to make sure you don't copy your code all the time. And here we are with getting the stub file name, and get the stub file name is for a status code, and get the data from the stub. And that's it. This was just 3 properties we have to use in extending the target type before. There's also a 4th step, which is conforming to the new target type. So we've managed to do this target type, but we have to also implement it into our GitHub API. So before we had GitHub API with only user profile, but also we have a failable user profile. So I was talking about getting error responses. So this is the case when we set the status code for this case as an error one, so it can fail. And we can specify how to get this error in our API. So also we switch over self, and when there is the failable user profile case, we just pass the dot to GitHub user API, which gives us an 404 error. And we change the implementation of stub status code, which we want to return 404 when there is a failable case, and to 200 when there is a positive successful case. And that's also it. You can see that there is no sample data in it, so we don't have to take care of providing the sample data for every response. We have every stub in our Xcode project already, but how do we set up that we use recording, or how do we set up that we use networking now or stubs now? So we have to change our provider initialization we had before. So before we only had endpoint closure, and now we have to pass the plugin we are setting. So we are passing the array of plugins. Here we just have one plugin, but you can see that there are more on the Moya website. And this is for when we want to record stuff. If we don't want to record stuff, we just don't pass the plugin network recorder. And if you want to use stubs, not only in testing, but also in your project when you don't have an internet, you just pass the stub closure. This is another closure that Moya provides. And here we are using immediately stub, which tells us, okay, so every time you run a request, you just get the stub response we've said before. And you are not going to run any network requests at all. So there is also another property of stub closure, which is delayed stub, which you can set that, okay, so after the request, give me a response after 3 seconds. And by default, it is the stub closure is never stub, so it will always ask the network for the response. And that's it. Thank you so much. If you have any questions. So if you want to see it in action, there's a GitHub repository on my GitHub, and I encourage you to see the example docs from Moya. And if you want to use Eric Swift with Moya, I have also a tutorial about it, so you can check it out. And I think that's it. Thanks.